Welcome, everybody. This is Greg Javer again. I'm back with Keith Crocker. I want to say really quickly, this is now Swedish erotica number 8 in the series, Girl on a Bike, that we're going to be talking about. But you may have noted in our previous film in the series that we have on this box, Western Lust number 4, ends rather abruptly just as she's reaching for the bottle. And you can imagine that she's likely going to slap him over the head with the bottle. And in matter of fact, that print ends a little bit abruptly, so I wanted to make sure that we fill in that gap really quickly. She does in other versions of the loop that you might find streaming floating around online. There are different versions of these, but you're not going to see them looking quite as sharp. You're not going to see the sharpness that you're going to see on these new high definition scans from actual film sources. Nonetheless, she slaps him over the head. There's one last line of dialogue: "Take that, you bastard." Then she gets her clothes and she walks right into the camera until we turn into total blackness.
Which is funny because initially she was being dragged into it, then she got into it, and then she decided at the end, oh, I'm still going to knock this guy out.
There's the shot again, Keith. I wasn't trying to time it, but Margie Lanier just rode her bike right into the camera
Right?
and into the darkness. Same exact shot.
And Greg, you bring that up beautifully because it's something that continuously happens in these loops. It gives it an artistic, what I call an artistic touch. They'll walk right into the camera, and the camera might pick up from their back or from their rear end as they're walking out. Great artistic touch, and like I said, it makes the films visually more stimulating. It adds an element of build-up or erotica, of which I believe Ed believed in. I think he felt just going into this stuff with no build-up was in the long run maybe anticlimactic. This is a buddy of ours, Greg. We've spoken on this man many times. Would you mind giving an introduction?
Sure, sure. A couple points. This is a loop that opens, like many of these loops often do, with just a casual hookup. This new breed of sexual animals don't even need to know each other's name, and they'll gladly hook up. So that happens as a de rigueur across loops. The gentleman is a very prolific actor. I think he's got something like 70 titles on his IMDb page. His name is Keith Erickson, also AKA Luther Worth, a few other AKAs. He appears in a number of loops. He appears in many, many feature films. Keith Erickson is not, I don't know what his real name is, but Keith Erickson is not his real name. He had a SAG card, so he performed in adult under a pseudonym, Keith Erickson, most often. He's actually a balding gentleman. He's wearing a goofy little toupee here. He wears goofy toupees in a few other films as well. This isn't the only time he does that. But I know you have more to say on Keith.
Yeah, I was going to say, first off, Greg, something that just hit me now, and this has to do with the quality of the transfer being as sharp as it is. Him wearing that toupee made him look a little bit like folk singer Phil Oakes. I had never realized it, but looking, I don't think that would be taken as a compliment. But I never realized how much he actually looked a bit like Phil Oakes wearing that, because Oakes had the scraggly hair that was often unkept, and that's how this toupee that he's wearing looks.
Right.
I've said of Keith Erickson, and I'll bring it up because I think there's a shot in this film that exposes something that I always kind of spoke to you about, Greg, and that was Erickson's teeth were horrendous. They always looked to me like they had been grinded down. And the grinding either could have been because he was a grinder, and at that time they didn't know about night guards, or it also could have been symptomatic of cocaine. A lot of people who were heavily into cocaine would grind their teeth, grind their mouth. So, but his teeth were always horrendous whenever they have him in a state of ecstasy. And they open his mouth and the camera tends to be on it. You want to scream, shut your mouth, please. I always found it nightmarish. But I always said in the early days of pornography, they tended to hire troglodytes. There weren't many people willing to do this, so they went into a cave and they would find a troglodyte and said, would you be willing to do this?
Well,
Greg, you want to speak on this? What are we looking at? A skin tag.
yeah, I was going to say we can go one further on the items that are a little bit unsavory. So yeah, skin tag. It's actually how you can identify Keith Erickson when he's stunt cocking. So he was reliable performer and extremely prolific, not only on screen in performing as himself, but also as a stunt cock. So I've seen it's so noticeable because you could see that large skin tag on the underside of the head of his penis. It's so noticeable that if you start to look for it, you'll see it as insert shots in other scenes where presumably the performer couldn't deliver.
You know, Greg, that's do you know that now, if this was to happen all over again, he'd be able to get rid of that. Skin tags are easy to
Right,
get
right.
rid of now.
And get his teeth fixed. He could get his teeth
Yeah,
fixed also.
wow. Yeah, he definitely could have got the teeth fixed. Really, seriously, as I've said before, in many ways, he's someone you have to get used to. There's what I call a freak show element to him, which is what pornography is about anyway, because they were trying to show you things you generally didn't see regularly. The other interesting thing about it, though, and think about this, Greg, this also ties into Holmes as well, is both of these guys come off as the everyday man. So we're not getting into that 80s gym style pornography where everyone's buff and built up. They just look like regular people. And I think that was the connection that was needed. That was what was seriously needed for the male audience, to see a guy just like themselves making love, picking a woman up and making love to her. So I think that might be where Keith Erickson comes in on the plus side. On the minus side, well, we discussed that. It was there were some rather bizarre things going on with Keith Erickson. So again, it brings in a little freakish element.
It does. There's sex and at points along the way here is a little bit frenetic, especially compared to the first two Virgin Next Door loops where Anna Lee Roper looks very close to comatose. That being said, Margie Lanier. So real quick on Margie Lanier, you may recognize her if you're an Ed Wood fan from Fugitive Girls as one of the main principals of Fugitive Girls.
Correct.
She's also worked with Renee Bond and
for his rotting teeth.
Yeah, right. She worked in only a handful of films, but she was also in a film called Hot Connections, which also Renee Bond and Tally Cochran appear in that. They all three of them also appear in a Fugitive Girls. But Hot Connections is from 1972, and she wears, Keith, in Hot Connections the same outfit she's wearing at the opening of this loop, the sweater with the large heart embroidered on it.
Look at that. Is that amazing? Is that amazing? The 6 degrees of separation, Greg. This is what you and I were talking about. It was a puzzle that needed to be put together. A lot of people didn't realize it. Even after the Nightmare of Ecstasy came out, not enough people were talking about the connections that were made with Ed Wood and pornography. So, really amazing.
Indeed. Connections abound, and it gets to be a rabbit hole that you can expend trust me, you can expend years of your life on it. We're going to expend another 10 minutes of our lives on the next commentary track, and we hope to see you there and join us. It's Greg Javer. I'm back with Keith Crocker. We're going to talk about another one of the first Swedish erotica loops, the earliest, the first 19 that are often believed to have been written and or at least directed, perhaps even by Ed Wood. Certainly probably wrote the subtitles, perhaps box cover summaries, perhaps other on-set activity yet to be determined and may never be definitively determined. So that's what we're trying to contextualize for you guys with these commentary tracks, to try to make a compelling case that we think there's a decent amount of evidence. I've said on a few previous tracks, connective tissue. We're trying to find the connective tissue that brings these loops together. This one happens to be number 17 in the series, so this is getting a little farther on in the first 19. That's Cindy Summers, so she's also in number 9, Lusty Neighbor, with our good friend Keith Erickson, and she's obviously with John Holmes. This happens to be, Keith, the loop that pairs in the first 19 with another loop, Hollywood Starlets.
Absolutely.
Starlet, rather.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg, I just want to bring up, as we're watching this here, in case people have any kind of questions regarding where do we get the loop connections with Ed Wood, I want to point out that there's a page off of Ed Wood's resume where he lists the name of short picture stories that he did in 1972. And a lot of these titles do not match these particular films, but God knows what titles were affixed to these prior to being shot, if any titles were at all.
may I, Keith? Because I'm really glad you mentioned that because that's worth bringing up because it's a bit of a I want to say myth that has swirled around for a number of years, that those 716 titles you're referring to on his resume that he lists as quote unquote short picture subjects.
Right.
And they were believed initially, and I myself believed them to be loops. I could never, to your point, find corresponding loop titles that matched up to anything on that resume. As it
Right.
turns out, I did start to find corresponding photo features in Pendulum magazines that lined up. So what they really were, short picture subjects, were photo features which he wrote a little bit of textual accompaniment or perhaps even just captions.
Right. And do you believe, Ed, that he might have also been on the photo shoots as well to
Oh
help?
yeah,
You
I'm glad actually went down this path because you'll find a lot of the same set decorations in photo features of photo sets that are in the Pendulum slash Calga magazines, the Bernie Bloom magazines of this
know,
era.
absolutely. And folks, I'm just going to read some of these titles to you anyway. They're really very interesting. Some of them are just flat out pornographic. Some of them are a little more ambiguous. You're not quite sure. But like some of them include, let me see. John said, do it. April did it. Tom loves Jerry's pussy. Get her into position. Okay. Little is luscious. Trio for satisfaction. Plenty of stuff around. Rooftop lesbian. The girl with fetishes. Transplanted lesbian. Clean it up good. Play it with lots of movement. A real horny chick. Young and very willing, weekend playground, etc., etc., etc. But
Yeah.
yeah, we want to share that with you folks.
It's
And
a staggering body of work when you consider how many paperbacks Ed wrote in addition to the number of stories and articles for the magazines. Then you start to think about that subject that he wrote potentially additional texts. He could have written magazines end to end, the editorials themselves, as well as captions, the texts accompanying the photo features. Then perhaps he's very prolific in loops as well. He's writing screenplays. His directorial feature career perhaps does, as far as we understand, end with The Young Marrieds, but I wouldn't hold it as an impossibility that more will turn up, more Ed Wood will turn up that we had previously been unaware of.
and you know what makes it interesting, Greg, and this is something that you and I have talked to people about is generally when you're in the advanced state of alcoholism that Ed Wood was at this
Yeah.
time, it is perplexing that he was able to turn out this much work. And that's really been the biggest question for me and you. We've often questioned ourselves, are we reading into this more than it should be? And truth be told, yeah, I'm glad that we question it from time to time because I think we want to stay as focused as possible. But in all reality, it still seems to indicate that Ed was in the position to continue the work, despite the fact that he was clearly coming down as a human being. I mean, he was not in. His looks were shot. No longer was he able to carry that kind of Barrymore look that he had in his early days of directing and even sometimes appearing in his own works. So, he had changed drastically, yet he still managed to function. And Noel Bloom goes on to say that. I did mention that in the other loop we were reviewing. I said that Bloom talked about him being a remarkable writer of incredible speed that could deliver fresh material continuously. So I think that that's really interesting, despite the fact that he was an advanced alcoholic.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think you're spot on, Keith, because I think if the Loops moved to San Francisco at roughly 75 or 76, Ed is not making that 300-mile hike routinely at that advanced stage of his alcoholism. Those last few years of his life, he's still writing very prolifically, but now somebody else is shooting the Swedish erotica loops, and not only Swedish erotic loops, the other cluster of loops that I've mentioned here on a few of the previous tracks, all the sort of Bloom related loops that seem to have all these myriad correspondences. It's worth mentioning here for 15-inch commercial, this is one of the first 19. You'll notice as you watch the Swedish erotic loops, very often they start with an exterior scene and then move on to an interior set. Here, this is clearly not a set. This is clearly an actual lived-in interior. There's just no doubt about it. They would never have dressed the set to this extent with an entire record collection and things of that nature.
No, no, they wouldn't have, and that's what makes this interesting because Greg, you're seeing it evolving. What we may be losing is some of the cinematic touches and tropes, but we see the fact that hell, we can just use an apartment. We can use somebody else's place to shoot these things in. There's less of a concern to dress them up to match a scenario. And also, as you point out, Greg, too, I want to go back to the subtitles which you mentioned and certain words that Ed used to love to use, and particularly Fanny. And you've mentioned this so many times, Greg, that the word Fanny comes up in these loops. Going back to these tropes, lick every drop, just about every shot, just about every loop ended with an oral cum shot, and the insistence of the characters in it to mention the obvious. Well, we see what's happening, but also the character is supposed to be saying it as well. Lick every drop, drink every drop. The whole thing, it keeps coming up, and it reeks of Ed's redundancy in his own writing. In his own writing, which goes all the way back to Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Indeed, and even just in the cluster of loops that are collected here on this set, a small sampling of the larger family of loops, you may have noted one constant. So in the Virgin Next Door and Virgin Next Door Part 2, the character is referred to by John as Red. The character in Western Lust is referred to by the character of Duke. At least that's how he's described in the box cover. He's not mentioned by name in the loop, but he refers to her as Red. And we just saw that again in 15-inch commercial, where John Holmes's character refers to the character as Red. They're all have red hair, of course, but that's not an accidental thing when you think about it.
No, by no means.
Right. So we hope I want to thank Keith for spending all this time with me on these commentary tracks, and I had a blast doing it, Keith, and we hope that certainly hope that you guys found some benefit at it and some enjoyment.
Greg, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed so much being a part of this, and we really do hope that this opens up your minds and makes you want to investigate more of what we call the Lost Edward work.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, everyone. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me and Keith Crocker. I'm Greg Javer for another loop commentary track on this box set, another loop that we feel Ed Wood probably had a hand in. One thing I wanted to talk about, among the capacities in which Ed may have worked on loops, well, we talk about the subtitles. We talk about could he have been directing on set? He does, in fact, very briefly appear in the Jailer loop. So as a performer, could he have been editing? That we haven't gotten into, but that's a complicated subject for another day. But there's some efficacy to an argument there that is a much more complicated argument than we have time for on these commentary tracks of the loops. But the box covers evince a lot of language that you'll find in Ed's texts very often, and a lot of the sort of same kind of broken syntax. And Keith, in fact, has the box cover for this particular loop, Devil Cult, right in front of him, I believe.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this to you now, Greg, and to the people out there. And it says, Devil Cultist Polzig captures this young virgin, and while she is at the altar, her flesh is taken with lust. She is given a potion which sends her into the depths of passion, where there are no bounds to the imagination. This film is a must-add to your collection. Greg, I'm going to go on to say this. Right there, Polzig. Halmar Polzig was the Boris Karloff character in The Black Cat of 1934. So now I ask you this, Greg. If it's Noel Bloom, or is it Ed Wood, do you really think Noel Bloom would right off the top of his head pick the name of Polzig to throw on this box? No, this is the work of Ed Wood, clearly. His obsession with Bela Lugosi, his familiarity with the westerns and the horror films of the 1930s and the 1940s. This gave him, the Devil Cult gives him an opportunity to do a scary or a semi-scary or what he thought was scary
Right. Right.
X-rated film, okay, which he also did with Necromania. So here you go again, Greg. This is Ed Wood exploiting his love of horror films by using iconography, images, props, and you're going to fill us in on that, Greg, and creating basically a horror porn. Okay, which
Certainly, yeah, certainly the box cover summary promises something a little more incendiary than what really happens in the loop. That's commonplace, obviously, but there's the bric-a-brac. It's not unlike Western lust, where we have here the candles. So the candles are representative of this sort of satanic orgy. In Western lust, it was just hanging a potato sack on the wall and propping a gun next to the bed. So that's the kind of bric-a-brac that you would see in Ed's earlier work. So he came from a place as a filmmaker where he operated within an economy of means. And that's still even more so the case by this point, more so the case than ever. You may also notice this set is the same set as Girl on a Bike.
waste not, want not, Greg. Waste not, want not. So just throw on some candles. Isn't there a skull apparatus in this as well?
I
Do
don't
we?
remember. I don't think we see the skull here, but the white there's the white skull and the gold skull both inhabit Hal Guthu's set, and they turn up. I, yes, of course, in Necromania and lots and lots and lots of other places.
Right. Absolutely. Greg, for those not out there, do you want to all mention what basically happened to Hal Guthu? Because I think I think it
Oh,
is for those who are not very aware of him and what did happen. It's a very interesting story, and that's a whole other area of research that could be done. But did you want to maybe shine a little light on that?
yeah. So Hal was his studio was torched, and he was found sitting behind his desk, having been shot in the head. And the speculation is that he had committed suicide and then tried to burn the place down. There's also speculation that he may have had pictures from his career as a talent agent of people who had become a person or people who had become A-list stars, and somebody was there to retrieve those so they wouldn't get out onto the sort of the tabloid circuit. So that's still it's an open question, and a lot of people do believe, in fact, that Hal was actually murdered and did not commit suicide. One of the points people often cite: Hal had a macaw parrot named Max, and it lived at the studio set very often, and in fact appears in a few films and loops that are shot there. But people said Hal loved that bird more than life itself, and Hal would not have torched the place with the bird in it. The bird was in fact found dead of smoke inhalation in the prop room. So I always envision it as a sort of a sadly fitting ending, with the bird now amongst the Chinese guardian lions and amongst things like some of the paintings that we see commonly in other loops, and
Yeah.
perhaps the white and the metallic skull. So Max might have been in very good company when he sadly tragically passed along with Hal.
And Greg, what year do we have that at? Is it around 2000, 2001?
Yeah, off the top of my head, yeah, you're spot on. 2002 at the latest. Yeah.
Right, right, which is later in the game, even if it was a hit. It's kind of later in the game for that to happen, but I think you brought up a really important point of him having a collection of photographs of A-list actresses, and that one would wonder. We're not gonna, one can only speculate, but the likelihood of him having this stuff and retaining it, holding on to it, and it becoming a threat to many of these people who had gone on to bigger and better things, one does wonder
Yeah.
if an assassin was hired. It doesn't seem too far out of reality. It really doesn't. You
Right.
know?
It's worth noting too, Keith, that everything you'll read, everybody who knew Hal personally spoke of him in absolutely glowing terms as one of the kindest, gentlest. Many of the young ladies who he worked for as their talent agent even thought of him a bit as a fatherly figure.
Right. Right. That's what I'm hearing. That was what my research had dictated, and that he was an authentically liked man. And a lot of people in this business are not liked. A lot of the ones, and even a lot of the ones that were in New York, do not have a reputation of being very nice or very good people. So when you constantly get a feedback on one of these people and it's positive, one realizes, hey, there is truth to this, that this man had a decency about him. So I
Right.
just think it's an important story and a kind of a macabre one, kind of
Yeah.
important for you and I to share this now in this semi-macabre loop,
Yeah, and if our surmise is correct or largely correct, then we have to think that Hal and Ed had spent an enormous amount of time together at Hal's studio if Ed was shooting loops there with such great frequency. As we come to a close here too, Keith, it's worth mentioning these loops would have been shot in sort of clusters. They wouldn't just show up on the set, dress the set, and shoot one loop. That's why you'll see multiple loops with the same or similar set decoration. They might slightly redress it and then immediately get another couple of performers out there, or get John Holmes back out there. He appears actually in 9 of the first 19 Swedish erotica loops, and he is essentially the star of the series throughout.
And we watch him go from softcore to hardcore because he was still doing some softcore work early 70s. So it's an amazing bridge that gets crossed in 1972.
Indeed. Indeed. We hope you enjoyed this one as well, everybody. So that one was number 14 in the Swedish erotica series, Devil Cult.